Hello, everyone, and thanks so much for listening to the Admit One podcast, where we interview students who have successfully navigated the college admission process and earned their ticket to college. We'll be reflecting on the student's academic profile, extracurricular activities, and application materials that were submitted successfully to college. Today, we are lucky to have Sonya, who is a freshman and business major at NYU. Sonya, thank you so much for joining us. We're excited to talk to you a little bit about your college application process and learn more about your journey through that application process.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to talk to you about this.
Cool. So let's start just kind of like tell us a little bit about your high school. Tell us a little bit about like where you grew up and what was your high school like?
Sure. So I grew up in Jacksonville, Florida, and the high school that I went to was Allen D. Neese High School. And one of the reasons why I chose the high school that I did was because of the IB program. So that, I think, really academically challenged me. And
when you were going to high school, were you like thinking about other potential places, like with different types of curriculum? Like, what was that process like for you from a selection standpoint?
Yeah. So there were actually a lot of other high schools in my area, and I was kind of looking into the business program. There was an engineering program. So I think for me, it was just choosing between like academics or like choosing a career-focused high school. And I think IB just happened to be the best fit for me because I wasn't really sure what I wanted to pursue in college. So it just really helped me keep an open mind, and it led me to where I am today.
Cool. And then talk to me a little bit about, from a curriculum standpoint, what was your HLs like, your SLs, and talk to us a little bit about like what that process is, because for those people who may not be familiar with the IB program, you're basically selecting the courses that you're going to take for both your junior and senior year at the end of sophomore year. And so that can be a little bit challenging for students, especially if they don't necessarily know what they want to pursue or have a couple of things that they may be interested in. So talk to us a little bit about like that selection process and kind of what went into your decision making.
Sure. So for us, it was a little bit more structured in the curriculum, but we did have the option to choose one of our HL classes. So in our high school, you automatically take English and history as your two HL courses, and then you have the third option, which you choose kind of between your sophomore and junior year, because the IB program really starts in junior and senior year. So before that, for the first 2 years of my high school, I was just taking pre-IB, like prerequisite courses that kind of helped me choose what HL course I wanted to take. And the rest of my 4 courses were SL courses. And for me, choosing my HL course, so what I did was I HL'd in math, and I had the option between computer science, math, and either one science course. So for me, that would be chemistry, because for the first 2 years of high school, I focused on taking AP chemistry, and then I did 1 year of IB chemistry. And the reason I decided to go with math was because I really felt like that was my strong suit, versus I kind of struggled in computer science. So I think when it comes to choosing your HL courses, it's really important to just think about what courses you're strong in and what like subjects you really are passionate about, because there's definitely a difference between the HL and SL level of the course, in the sense that HL courses are definitely much harder, and they're a lot more rigorous. So,
did you notice that as like a distinct difference between your SLs and your HLs as far as like the types of material you were covering and the pace and everything?
Yeah, I did. The HLs definitely went a lot faster, and it was a lot more material packed into every class. And in addition to that, it was a lot more kind of homework and like preparation off to the side, versus SL, like a lot of the topics that are covered in HL aren't really covered in SL courses. And I think HL really is about going deeper into the course and looking at more of the nuances. Um, so like I would say like HL math is like equivalent to taking maybe like AP Calculus BC,
Yeah.
versus SL is more just it kind of stays on the level of like AP Calculus AB.
Mm-hmm. Or even like pre-calc or something
Yeah,
like that.
even pre-calc.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's kind of interesting that your high school has the requirement that you have to take HL. You said English and history, right? So
Yeah.
From a selection process standpoint, when you're only basically getting, so for listeners who may not be familiar with the IB program, you essentially get 3 HL classes that you would take within the IB program. Occasionally, a high school will allow you to take a 4th HL course, but that's pretty rare. So for most students, they'd be taking the three HLs. Generally speaking, the students have a little bit of flexibility as far as what they take for what those HLs are. So there wouldn't necessarily be like a predetermined course list. But it sounds like for you that is not the case. So when you're thinking about that final HL, was there a lot of debate from your standpoint, or you said you were always pretty strong at math? So was it pretty like, okay, this makes sense, this is what I'm going to do?
For me, I think it was pretty straightforward. Like you said, like I was strong in math, and I had been taking like advanced math courses throughout high school, and I felt like the level that I was at math was like much stronger than the level I was for computer science. But I wouldn't say that was necessarily the case for my classmates. They definitely had like a difficult decision choosing between whatever elective courses they were taking. And I think for math, like there's also prereqs, so you have to be at a certain level of math to be able to take HL math.
Yeah.
So for me, I was just at that level, so I felt like it was the best choice for me.
And did you if you could have chosen other courses, are there courses that you wish you had taken? Like, were you okay with taking AP English and AP History, or sorry, IB HL History and HL English, or were there other courses that you wish you had taken?
I think I was honestly okay with taking English and history, just because they were a little bit on the easier side of the HLs.
Mm-hmm.
Like my other options, like if I were to be interested in something else, it possibly could have been taking computer science
Mm-hmm.
as my HL course, just because you do get that little bit of extra like knowledge, and like the lesson plan kind of delves deeper.
Mm-hmm.
And I felt like for at least my major in college and like in doing business, like data science kind of does play a big role in
Yeah.
that. So just having that knowledge would have been great. But
So when you're making the decision on HLs, did you have an idea that you wanted to pursue business? Did you know that was potentially what you wanted to do, or you at that point you were still like pretty unsure? I mean, that's the crazy thing with HLs is that like you're basically just finishing your sophomore year and you're making a decision on what you want to do. So for a lot of students that makes a lot of sense, but if you're not really sure and you tie into something and then you say, oh, I wish I had done this, or I can't do the X, Y, and Z now, that's the only kind of caveat that I would have. But was that a thought process for you at all?
yeah, so I didn't really know that I wanted to do business until my senior year. Um, and I think that was partially due to like I did get the option, like more of a choice in my freshman and sophomore year of like what electives I wanted to do outside of the core curriculum. So like I did science and I did computer science. I even took like psych as an elective,
Mm-hmm.
and that just kind of let me explore. And I kind of found that like STEM wasn't for me. Um,
Not
so I
for me
think that
either.
yeah, no,
That wasn't for me either.
yeah. Science was definitely a bit of a struggle for me.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that kind of did influence my decisions.
Sure.
Um, but I wouldn't necessarily say that it constricts you in the choices that you get to make, because you do get some leeway in choosing elective courses. And you do get to explore a little bit about like different areas and different subjects.
Mm-hmm.
But
And you'll have like
Yeah.
project-based things and stuff that you're working on like within a larger scope within the
Yeah.
IB program, which is
Yeah.
good too. Cool. So let's talk a little bit about from an extracurricular standpoint. Walk us through like maybe the 2 or 3 things that you feel like you were most involved with throughout high school, things that you were like most proud of, and then we can talk a little bit about how those things developed.
Yeah, so one of the biggest things that I was involved in throughout all 4 years of high school was that I was involved in a volunteer-based nonprofit organization. It was called Children's International Summer Village. Um, and previous to that, in middle school, I had done a few like travel abroad programs with them. But my role in high school was definitely more centered towards like volunteer and leadership positions on their like junior board, and it was definitely more community service focused. And being an IB, there was a requirement that you have to have 150 hours of community service. So that was definitely a big factor in why I was so involved in this. And then
So
the
you had
second
said you had
thing,
done it. Oh, sorry. Let's go back for a second. So you had said that you were somewhat connected to them in middle school. Like what was the kind of the connection? Like how did you get involved with them? And then what was that kind of trajectory of like taking on different leadership roles? And how did you get to sort of build a unique place within that organization?
yeah. So I kind of got involved through a family friend who had told us about the travel programs, and I ended up traveling with their daughter. Um, and in middle school, it was more about me just doing their travel programs and like getting a sense of what the organization is like, and what their goals are centered towards. And then I kind of realized that like I really like this, like I want to be more involved in this. And for high schoolers, they do offer more opportunities to get involved in the program, um, mainly that being through holding like some leadership position on their junior board. So they have a lot of like local chapters all throughout the U.S. So where I come from, Jacksonville, they have a big chapter there. So I realized that I kind of wanted to get more involved in like planning the local community activities and going more towards the service side versus just traveling with the program. Um, so that's kind of how I got into it.
And so what is your role there when you're doing more of like the community service stuff and doing things within the local community? Like how,
Mm-hmm.
what are some of the, like the tasks, assignments, roles that you have within that?
Yeah. So I started off as like the treasurer of the local chapter, and that was more like fundraising and like um, we had like a local store where we would sell like merchandise with the like we call it CISV logo, um, and that was more of like I guess managing the money. But later on, I had a more involved role in like planning community like service activities, such as like we would volunteer with local food kitchens, or we would set up like donation drives, and kind of get more of the like younger community involved. So not only were we like focusing on community service, but we were also focusing on like increasing participation within the organization.
And do you feel like that organization, because a lot of times I think, especially if students become interested in business or they think they want to major in business, they have this idea that they have to either do like an internship or they have to create a company or something like that. And I
Mm-hmm.
always think, I say, well, no, I mean, you could do like volunteer work. And I think that connects in so many ways to business and entrepreneurship. Do you feel like that kind of sparked your interest in that? Or do you feel like that was like a separate entity?
I think, yeah, a little bit it did spark my interest, because I think community service really relates to like understanding your local community and like how you can benefit your local community and in what ways you can improve it. And I think business goes beyond just like the basic business rules that you would think of. Like a business's goals are really towards helping their community and making it a better place. And I think for me, I'm definitely interested in more of like the sustainable and like um, consulting side of business. So that could potentially involve nonprofit consulting for me in the future. So it definitely did help spark my interest.
Cool. Yeah, that's interesting. And the other thing I think that you make a very good point on that I think sometimes students and families miss is that they oftentimes they want some like grandiose thing, like, oh, I did an internship at Goldman Sachs, and my mom also just happens to work for Goldman Sachs or something as well. But like they just randomly they'll want something that's like large. And to me, I always advise like I don't need you to chase a big name thing. I'd rather you have something even more locally, because the role that you can have and the significance that you can play within that local chapter is much more dramatic than if you're just kind of a cog in the wheel. In more of a large scale type of thing. So I think that's a great point. And then, so talk to us about, you were mentioning another thing that you feel like you were pretty well involved with through high school as well. So maybe we can touch on that a little bit.
Sure. So this kind of relates more to like your point about wanting to do an internship. So it wasn't really an internship, but my junior year, I got the opportunity to work with like the finance department at the University of Memphis. And I was working on this research project with a PhD student, where we were looking at gender diversity on like the corporate boards of large organizations. And this was more of like a research focused task. So it was definitely something that was newer to me. And I think this was also another like crucial extracurricular that kind of sparked my interest in business. And I think it kind of stemmed out of the pressure to like have some sort of like internship or like research role in high school. Just because senior year was where I kind of started realizing I wanted to do business as my major in college. So I would say this extracurricular is definitely more focused towards that.
Yeah, that's huge. And I also think that what's interesting about that is so many times when you have a student who's interested in like business or entrepreneurship, if you bring up the idea, or really a lot of different humanities, but if you bring up the idea of research, there's kind of this hesitancy because I think that there's this perception that like research is done in a lab kind of a thing. But conducting research from a business standpoint on finance or economics, or like, you're talking about like HR stuff and corporate level and gender differences and things of that nature. I think that's a massive experience to have for high school students and a perspective that they wouldn't have otherwise had. And so, if you're able to complete research and that is a part of what your profile looks like, there's also so many ways that you can develop that, right? So then if you wanted to do an internship, you go to a company and you say, hey, look, I've done research on X, Y, and Z. I saw on your website that you have, these members of your team. I'd like to talk a little bit about how we can diversify, and here's a project area that I'd like to do for you. You're much more likely to get people to say yes to that than if you just say, hey, can I intern for you? Like, they're gonna be like, no, I don't want you. Like, I don't have time for that. So having that research experience is definitely pretty interesting. Was that like, when you went into it, did you like, what were your expectations of research from a business standpoint?
So I was definitely thinking more of like, I was going to be like looking up things on the internet and like, I guess going through like spreadsheets or like large amounts of data. But that wasn't what I did at all, I would say. It was more, I got to call like governments of like different like state departments. And I was basically asking them if they had any like mandates or any policies that they put out relating like gender diversity. So I think what I did definitely differed from my expectations. And like you said, like we definitely have like a very like structured, like stereotypical idea of what research is. And it can definitely go beyond that. And it definitely depends on like what project you're working on and what it entails. So I'm very grateful that my role was more hands-on and it was something that I was more interested in.
Yep.
Yeah.
And there's more like field work to it too.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, and so many times like with research, people get really tied up on, they want a publication or they want like an award for it. And like, to me, from an admission perspective, I'm reviewing an application. I'm not reading your 25-page research paper like that. That I have 10 minutes to review an application. That's not going to happen. But what I'm looking for is in like your application and your short answer questions, if you're able to talk about the way that you've pursued something in a unique way and you've thought critically about it, that's what to me jumps out. And I think your profile in a lot of ways is kind of exactly the way that I talk to students about thinking about their extracurriculars, because so often I feel like students view extracurriculars as, okay, I'm going to do a million different things and I'm going to have all this stuff on my resume and I'm going to send it in, and the college is going to be like, wow, you did a million things, you're admitted. And like that's just not the way that a college application works at all. When you apply to college, you're going to have 10 activities that you can list within your application, and you get 150 characters on the Common App to describe those activities. So that's like a sentence and a half. Most colleges won't even take a resume. So to be able to have really 10, 12, 15 things, like I'm really not going to be able to focus on all of those. For somebody like you have a couple of things that are really unique and that are different and that are specific to you, and you kind of remove yourself from the context of your peer group and do these independent, individualized things, which I think is really important. Was that like something you were cognizant of, or was that just something that kind of came about as you moved through the process?
So I would say more came about as I moved through the process. So in the beginning, like more towards my freshman and sophomore year, I felt like I needed to have like quantity over quality on my application. So I was like involved in different clubs and I was doing like all these different things. And then along the line, I kind of realized like, I think it was through talking to like upperclassmen and like talking to my guidance counselors, where I realized like it's more important to be able to like talk about the experiences that you're doing and to be able to like explain it in depth. And like if someone were to ask me about it, like I should have a good idea of like what I'm doing rather than just be able to like list every extracurricular that I've done.
Yep.
So I think after my sophomore year is where it like evolved into like focusing on a few things, but like making sure that I was passionate about it and I was really involved in those things. Because I feel like you said, like colleges want to go beyond just the surface level, and it's easy to just like list off a bunch of extracurriculars, and that's like a lot of like applications. That's what they have in common. So I think I started realizing like what can I do to like set myself apart from others.
Yep.
And I think focusing on those unique opportunities is what really helped me.
Yeah. So that I think is critical, because it really, at the end of the day, it comes down to like the depth at which you pursue something as opposed to the breadth of what you've done and the amount of things that you're doing. And so to be able, and like I only think about it from the perspective of the reader, right? If I'm an admission person and I'm reviewing an application and, I'm reading 40, 50, 60 applications in a day, and, they all look pretty similar. And that, I'm the vice president of this club. I am on the soccer team. I do dance. Like those things are not, I'm not saying that you can't do them, but there's a lot of kids who do them. So it's really hard to be an elite applicant comparatively. But then if you get to, I did research on this aspect of business. I worked with this specific organization within my community where I had significant role and it evolved over time and all of those kinds of things. I think that is something that you don't see, and that's where you want to kind of get outside of the context of your high school to do those unique experiences, really.
Yeah.
Cool. Okay, and then so let's talk a little bit about like your school list development, right? So as you get into your junior year, did you know you wanted to go to NYU? Were there other places that you were looking? Obviously, you're coming from Florida, so it's not like it's right around the corner and like a school within your state. What are some of the ways that you started to think a little bit about the types of colleges that you were looking at?
Yeah. So when I first started the process, I was really confused as to like how I would kind of narrow down my list. And like I started by just going on like US News and like searching up like, best business schools, or like schools ranked like the top 10 in like finance. And then as I started like talking to like people who had already been through the process, and I kind of got involved as like OB became my like college advisor when I joined Accept You. I started realizing it was also about thinking of like other like qualities that I wanted to see in the college that I was going to pick. So like that could involve location, or did I want to go to like a private or a public college? Was I looking for more like liberal studies focused college? Just a lot of other factors besides just like rankings and like academics. Because I feel like beyond academics, like your social life and
Yeah.
being able to like connect with your college and the peers who are going with you to that college is definitely a lot more important. Um, so when developing my list, I started factoring in those qualities.
Mm-hmm.
And I kind of made like a spreadsheet of like uh, each college's like different qualities, and how like well I thought I fit into that college. And then in addition to that, I think during my like junior year summer, I did like a little college tour.
Mm-hmm.
So I kind of went up the East Coast, and I hit like a few of the major colleges on my list. And I think just being there and like being present on the campus and kind of feeling that environment of like the students around me and getting to like look at the different buildings, getting to like see like the city colleges versus like colleges with like a defined campus or like the rural area colleges.
Mm-hmm.
So I think going through that definitely helped me like narrow down my list.
Were you like automatically drawn to city campuses? Because like NYU, I feel like people either love NYU or like, oh, this is too much for me. Like I live in Washington D.C. I love the city. When I go to NYU, I'm like, oh man, I would love to be 18 years old, 19 years old, and be in New York City. But a lot of times I feel like I hear kids that are like, they get there and it's overwhelming or whatever. So were you kind of automatically drawn to that, or did it take some time for you to be able to envision yourself there?
Yeah. So like where I come from, it's definitely more like suburban. So I knew I wanted to be in like that city like lifestyle and kind of experience like that fast life. Um, but when I visited NYU, I was kind of unsure because I was like, it's definitely like very in the heart of the city, and there's no real campus to NYU. It's just kind of like buildings in the middle of New York City,
Mm-hmm.
um, versus like I was looking at like UPenn and a lot of like Columbia, where it was in the city, but it was also like it had its own like secluded campus area. So like
Mm-hmm.
I would get like a taste of like both, I guess.
Sure.
But ultimately, I kind of just realized like why not just like throw myself into it, and NYU, like I guess being in the city has its advantages.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it was just something that I was like, I have to experience this.
Yeah, that's cool. So then you get to like the beginning part of your senior year, and do you know you want to go to NYU? Are you going to ED there? Did you ED anywhere else? Did you not ED? Like what was the kind of strategic approach that you utilized?
Yeah. So I ED'd to UPenn. I did ED1 there, and then I got rejected. And then that was kind of like very heartbreaking for me, and I was very like dejected about that.
Mm-hmm.
But then in talking to like my friends and talking to like my college advisor, I realized like maybe things happen for a reason. And like when college advisors are going through the process of like reviewing your application, what they're really thinking about is like how well you as a person will fit into their community.
Mm-hmm.
So like they're making the best decision. So maybe like there's another college where I would fit in better. So I ended up doing ED2 to NYU, and it kind of worked out. It worked out well. Yeah.
Smart decision. Yes. I think a lot of times what happens is if you don't get into your ED, there's kind of this feeling of like, oh, now I don't want to commit anywhere because there's this like hesitancy to do it. But in your case, like if you apply ED to the NYU, the worst thing that happens is you have to go to NYU, which is like a pretty awesome place to go to college, and you don't get to hear from the other schools. But at the end of the day, like, you're giving yourself a great strategic advantage. So I think that's definitely a smart way to go. And also, like, people are going to get rejected. Like, most kids get rejected from at least a couple of colleges, and most kids get rejected from, whatever maybe their top school is. And that's okay. Nobody built you a college, and there's probably a lot of places that you'd be really successful. And while it is challenging, I actually think that there's some value as a young person to feel like, a little deflated and have to overcome that, and to be able to kind of figure out what's the next step and put yourself in the best position possible, which obviously it sounds like you have certainly done. And from a business perspective, I mean, you couldn't be in a better position than to be in New York City. So things always tend to work themselves out at the end of the day.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that.
Cool. So let's talk a little bit about, I'll just bring up your essay, and we can talk a little bit about kind of your thought process as you approached your main essay. So let's just talk about this. So this is your Common App essay, where you're talking a little bit about kind of the camp and the program that you had mentioned earlier. So maybe walk us through what were you trying to get across here, and what was kind of the thought process on making this as your main essay?
Yeah. So I think really what I was trying to get across was like my personality mixed with like something important that I've done in my life, and something that I was really passionate about. So initially, like, going through the Common App prompts, I kind of did like a little brainstorming session where I was thinking about like what I could talk about in my essay, and what prompt really like fit best into what I wanted to like say or what I wanted to tell colleges, because really like the Common App is the first thing that they read and see about you. And I realized like how heavily involved I was in this organization throughout high school, and it was really something that was important to me. So I knew that I definitely wanted to include that. And it was important to me to talk about one specific experience that I had that really changed me as a person. And I think the experience that I did end up talking about in this essay was like one of the most important experiences that I've had in high school. So that's definitely how I started thinking about the essay.
Yeah. And I think one of the things that you do well, which is hard, honestly, is that you talk about one experience, but then you connect it to several other elements of your high school journey and your experience in high school, which is challenging because I think a lot of times kids try to fit in like 5 things about their high school experience, and it ends up reading more like a paragraph form resume. But you, I think you do a couple of good things. Like in this last paragraph, you say, "Step up helped me to realize that I don't have to be afraid to be assertive and speak my mind." And then a couple sentences later, you say, "I probably wouldn't have been brave enough to start a club at school that advocates peace and diversity and encourages younger generations to give back to their community through volunteer projects. I wouldn't have been bold enough to organize and lead service projects like food and clothing drives through clubs like National Hispanic Honor Society." And so you're giving examples of like how this served as kind of like a foundation for you to be able to build on things as you move forward, which I think is honestly hard, because did you want to talk like more in depth about some of those other things, and did you kind of shrink it down, or was this kind of like an organic way to approach it?
I think it was more of like an organic way to approach it, because what I did realize was they already have my resume. They'll already get like an idea of all the other extracurriculars that I've done. So what I wanted to write about had to be something that was not on my resume, and kind of shows like who I am as a person more. And I think for me, I was focusing on like the lessons that I've learned through this experience, and how I could really connect it to my like high school journey. Yeah, like you said, I definitely found it important to like connected to like who I am today. So for me, it was like a connection between my like past and present.
Yeah. And I think that that one of the things that is important in this is oftentimes students, and I think it's just like the way that we even, not we, but like people approach the Common App. Like they're like, okay, you have to write your college essay. And then it feels like, oh, Jesus, how am I going to write that, like everything about my life for the last 18 years in 650 words? And so there's this tendency for kids to put basically everything into this Common App. And I think what you say is very important, which is they're going to have other pieces of it. And so what you're trying to do is illustrate the things that either served as the foundation to be able to help you do that, or a high level component that you want to expand on that you don't get the chance to. And so looking at it as like a piece of the puzzle is important, as opposed to looking at it as its own individual entity. And that's a mistake that a lot of people make. And that's why I also tell kids, like, don't start with the main essay, right? If you like start by, okay, I've got to write and the way they look at it is my college essay, but you're going to have several other pieces that that you're submitting. Like NYU is going to have other pieces, and UPenn has like 5 essays that you have to write. So there's a bunch of different things. So the idea that you have to think about this as like your main college essay is not a fair representation in my mind.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I think like definitely think of the Common App as like just another piece to your application, and kind of try to think about it like holistically. So like think about how it could fit into the rest of your application. So something that really helped me was like I first like did my resume and like kind of made a list of like all the extracurriculars that I've done in high school and all the experiences that I've had. And I kind of listed out like all the academic experiences, all the social experiences. And then I kind of found like what was the one like main overlying idea that stood out between everything that I've done. And so for me, that was more like volunteering and like kind of having like a leadership role in my community. Because I found that to be common throughout almost all of my experiences. So that just kind of gave me the foundation to start my essay.
Yeah, that's great. Cool. Well, this is super helpful. I like to end with, if kind of putting you on the spot, but thinking a little bit about what was something that either you wish you had known, or that you wish you had thought about differently, or something that you feel like you did really, really well that you think would be a good piece of advice for students who are going through that process right now of submitting applications and all of those things. Is there anything that kind of jumps out to you?
I think something that I would have done differently was start thinking about the college process earlier. Because I think like don't discount your like freshman and sophomore year experiences, because everything is meaningful. And I think if I had started thinking about it earlier, I may have been able to like develop my experiences more, and kind of have like more of that long-term commitment. Like for example, I kind of wish I'd started having like more leadership roles earlier in high school, and like maybe working earlier on that research project. But something like a piece of advice that I would like give to people who are entering the process is like go in with an open mind. And it's okay like if you don't know exactly what career, like what major you want to pursue, because that's what college is about. And I think when you're looking at like what college is right for you, try to think beyond the academics, and try to think about also like, will that college serve your purpose in like a social aspect, or maybe through like what courses interest you, or maybe like what clubs interest you at that college. So I kind of wish I'd done more research on that.
Yeah, it's all just building your knowledge base. And to me, when I talk to kids about this all the time, I'm like, sometimes it feels like the students feel like this is like a task that they have to do to research colleges. And I'm like, Dude, this is a once in a lifetime deal. Like, you're only going to college one time. So the idea of researching colleges shouldn't feel daunting. It should feel like exciting of this is where I'm going to live. And this is, these are the people I'm going to be with. And these are the organizations I'm going to be a part of. And if you told me right now that I could move anywhere I want for 4 years, I'd like look into the area a little bit, and try to figure out what are the things that I'm most excited about. And so that's really the way that I would look at it, as opposed to this kind of stressful process that, you put all this pressure on yourself to get into, a school that your neighbor is going to be impressed with the sweatshirt that you wear and that kind of thing. And that's just not the reality. I mean, it should be about where you, where you feel most comfortable and confident, and where you're most likely to be successful. So I think that's great advice.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Sonya, for taking the time. I know college is very busy, so I'm sure you don't have a ton of time to be able to talk to us. So I very much appreciate you doing that. And this is going to be very helpful for all of the students who listen. And we look forward to hearing about how things progress for you over the next several years at NYU. So thanks again for taking the time.
Yeah. Thank you so much for having me.
All right. Thanks, everybody. And if you guys have anybody, if you're a listener that knows a college student who might be interested in talking about their story, feel free to reach out to us directly, and we'll be back with more episodes in the weeks to come. Thanks so much, everybody.